we'll make a start. As I said before, we are the Tenchfishers, and this is really just looking. Tench fishing the future is what are the possibilities for moving forward in a currently quite often carp dominated world. So just briefly, and I promise to everybody this will not be death by PowerPoint, because I can think of nothing worse. So and I certainly won't be reading every bullet point out, but just to pick some of the highlights, just to give you an idea of Tenchfishers. So we go back a long way, almost to when I was born, which is a really long time ago. We've got a good solid membership, as you can see there, in the high 400s now. We're pretty well organised. We have events, and we've taken catch records for just about as long as the Tenchfishers have been around, and that has proved very useful. I'm very keen on the supporters of the Angling Trust. We support the trust as a group who we're registered with, and probably half to 2/3 of our membership are also individuals as well. Can't say exactly, but we certainly see that as a very, very strong relationship, and this is just proof of it. And we have a very we've put effective online presence. We communicate a lot as a group in a very organized and polite way, so the membership is engaged rather than just joining for the hell of it. We touched on the NTHA, and we've called it the National Tench Heritage Alliance, and there's two key words in there. First of all is the heritage bit. Tench have always been part of the fishing culture in this country. The tench is probably recognised, and I've seen a number of surveys where they say, you know, it is the most popular fish. Everybody likes catching a tench, and a lot of us have a passion for it. It's the heritage part. The alliance part is we cannot get anything done with moving forward without forging these alliances, working with partners, working with other agencies, and the Angling Trust is one, and we'll come on to a diagram I've got later, which is really saying you need to be working with people rather than alone on this. And so that's why we got into the name for it. We started off what turns out to be now about 8 years ago, very embryonic then. I am very keen on the second point, which is putting something back. We are a group who not just, yes, we like catching big tench and talking about them and taking pictures and methods and tactics, but this is broader than that. And the membership are fully behind this, the NTHA. So the objectives, and I think this is really important, this is why we're here today. So the education and the knowledge part of tench and tench fishing, and it's about the fish more so than the fishing, really. So raising the profile, we really ought to be protecting the tench fishing and fisheries that exist now, but also, and here's what I'm here for, any people with club members or fishery managers, just to encourage the promotion of tench rather than just chucking a few fish in and saying, well, we've got some tench in there. Okay, we work with people. This is part of the alliance, and ultimately the lobbying and the encouraging part is how do we get this to happen? And we'll talk about the Environment Agency later, who will be key in all this, but also with other partners and people who will help us and you, if indeed you want to embrace this with that. So this is the diagram I talked about. You'll see on now, I'm not going to go through every particular part of it, but you'll see at the top the Environment Agency, the Fisheries, and the Calverton, which is where they breed their fish, the Angling Trust, and favourite part of mine right down the bottom is fish refuge suppliers. I'll show you a picture near the end, an image near the end of this, which is about fish refuges and how you really need to be protecting what you've got before you start putting more and more fish into places. So we've got that's just an idea of the sort of alliances that you will need, as well as the NTHA does, of course, to make this happen. And we're in a position to advise and help people on that.
Sometimes I wonder if tench fishing's really got a future. They are a particular species, they have a particular niche, and They have suffered in my lifetime, certainly to the extent where when I started fishing in the 60s, the majority of waters had tench in. Now it's very much a minority. So there's been a change, taste change, fashions change. So we've seen a decline in the number of waters that have tench. We haven't seen a decline in the size of the tench. At their best, they're as big as they've ever been. That's a different story. But what I will say is it's pretty well impossible to create a specimen tench fishery in the way that you might create a specimen carp fishery. It's pretty well impossible. You can create tench fisheries, but growing fish into double figures is something that is, something that nature does in certain situations. The main issue, I think, really is one of recruitment in many instances. And that's item 4 there, which I want to draw attention to. And the problem with tench is, of course, they spawn relatively late. So they have a fairly short period for the tiny little fry, which are about 4 millimeters long, to develop into fish that are going to survive through the winter. So if it's a particularly cold late summer, they will have issues. If it's a particularly cold early summer, then they will spawn late, and all these things affect the recruitment. And so good spawning years for tench are a minority. They may only happen once every 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years. So it means that very often populations are on a bit of a knife edge. So the issue of recruitment, I think, is very important. The other issue that affects tench in particular, I think, is the issue about fish breeding. Now, it's much easier to produce fast-growing carp. King carp are selectively bred to grow very fast. And tench grow, the science says slow growers. I would say they grow relatively slowly, which means that they're relatively expensive if you want to bring them through to a reasonable stockable size. And quite often that means that really, if you're an angling club with carp, you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck. And that is evidently true. It is more expensive to stock with sizable tench when you can get them, given the fact that they are larger tench are relatively hard to get hold of. It mentions there overstocking of competing species. Tench are not great competitors. Ideally, what they like to do is to more or less dominate a water. So if you want really good tench fishing, then they've probably got to be the primary species in the water. But they will do very well in balanced fisheries as long as there is a balance, just that, between the species and not an overriding number of one or other competing species. And they will go back and they will disappear if there is overstocking of competing fish. And the whole point about tench is, and the really important thing is, you've got to make room for them. You've got to ensure in a given water that you have a situation where the tench have a niche that they can exploit. Then if they can do that, they will be fine. And in theory, at least, they will self-propagate and you will have tench forevermore as long as the balance is maintained. So what are we about? Well, basically what we want to do is, I think first and foremost, is to make sure that people who have good tench fishing look after it. That, I think, is a really important consideration. It is much easier, as I've said, to undermine a tench population than it is to create one. So that if you have a decent tench fishery, for goodness sake, be careful what you're doing in terms of stocking. And generally speaking, if you want a bit of this and a bit of that and a few of these, and you don't have a plan and you're not careful, then the tench very often are the species that will suffer. Obviously, I'm a tench nut, and I believe that tench fishing has its own ethos, its own character, its own place in the fishing world, and I'll do everything I can to promote that. And I don't think, that many all-round anglers would argue with that. So we're interested in protection of tench. We're interested in how you might develop new tench fisheries, bearing in mind always that you've got to make room for them. And we hope that people will stop and think a little bit more about tench. That if you've got a club with a number of waters, let's say that particular one is going to be our tench water. And one of the things I would say is, if you want big tench, you need a big water, 5 acres minimum, and ideally, well, as big as it gets. But the top tench waters, they're often, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 100 acres. And that tends to be best for really big tench. So that's also worth bearing in mind. Sometimes you get collections of waters and they put the tench in the little pond, which works up to a point, but only up to a point. That's, again, something that needs to be considered. So we hope to nurture better attitudes, and always remember that most people like tench, and they do appeal to weekend and average anglers, and they're as important as anybody else.
Thanks, Phil. Just to give us that gave us a flavour. So this is how can we do it? That, and there is no one size fits all. There is no magic answer, but there are some things you can do. And if I'm a great believer in, if you want something badly enough, you can make it happen. We have done, the Tenchfishers have done a lot of work at Sywell Reservoir. Some of you may know it's in the Northamptonshire in the Midlands. The tench population used to be, it's an iconic water for big tench, went downhill around about the turn of the century, and we've done a lot of work there and learned a lot of lessons, I might add, by talking to people who know far more than we do, about helping to try and put it back on its, or to some way towards where it used to be before. And that was all sort of good learning, and we spent quite a bit of money as well. We're working with the Angling Trust, and also very important with other big bodies as well. We are starting to generate our knowledge base, and I'm going to say I've put social media ... Social media has its place in the world, and if managed properly, it's a fantastic resource, and we're benefiting today from that. And it's a good way of sharing knowledge, and also in terms of whether it's documentation or this type. So yeah, we very much embrace that as well. What I have agreed, well, Phil and I, if a club or association is serious about wanting to create or look after an existing tench fishery, or perhaps improve what they've got, we will be willing to come out and, wherever possible, meet with you and talk to you and share what we can to help you on your journey. So opportunities are there. And the last bit is, and this is working with now the Angling Trust. We've got some web space we're just in the process of populating, which is all about let's call it a resource, a document library, and there'll be information in there that you can see with the various points about where we can give advice and who to talk to. We're not the experts, but we can certainly become a centre of knowledge, and we can point you the direction of people who know that, and also the lessons we've learned. So that's where how we try to hope. We're not going to sit here and say you should go and do this. We're willing to actually roll our sleeves up in an administrative sense and help you. So there's just 3 more images to come, and then we've finished with the PowerPoint piece. This is absolutely crucial. Now, this is at Sywell Reservoir. You might notice the valve tower in the back. It doesn't matter where it is. We spoke to aquaculture experts and fishery managers, and the first thing, the Environment Agency, the first thing they told us was, you've got to protect what you've got. You've got to protect what nature is providing in terms of small fish. You've got to, from predation. These are fish refuges. You can see there, they're very simple to construct, and if you can put those into your water, you're going a long way towards looking after your investment. And it is money, and we're putting money into a big watery hole in the ground. We've had surveys, underwater surveys, scanning surveys done on these, and the fish are all round these. They're very, especially if you've got a cormorant issue, and I'm sure it helps with otteras as well. But protect your fish first. Very, very important. We can advise you on how to build these. We've got some documentation. This is just an example. This is from a fishery. We've put some tench, with a lot of tench, back into Sywell, different year classes, different breeders, and this is just some of the little bars of gold that have gone in there. It's a nice picture. We all like a tench. And the final one, please. Make friends with your local fishery officers from the Environment Agency. They are absolutely essential into helping you getting stuff done. They've got knowledge. They've got, and if you put in the right type of case, they can even supply small tench for you. That's a guy called Jake Reeds, and that's at Sywell again, and they've come along and they're actually putting some small tench into Sywell. And this is one of the alliances I talked about before, and these really are the good guys. So that's all from me. Thank you very much, Alex, and I think we're going to take some questions.
Well, that was brilliant. Thank you so much for that, guys. Really, really concise overview of what is a mammoth task, really. But I thought you did a fantastic job of, getting some of the key messages across there. And I can see we've already got plenty of comments, which is fantastic to see. And by all means, do keep them coming. So I think what we'll probably do is then Ian and Phil will dive straight into some of the points that have already been raised off the back of that. So firstly, and I think this is quite good because it was touched on to an extent there. So Andy's come in and said that we've got a tench pond at Ravenfield, only about ½ an acre in size, with crucians, tench and rudd. How can we increase the size of our tench? So I guess initially that relates to water space, competition with species, although I've got to say that sounds like a fantastic mix in there, Andy. Crucians, tench and rudd. Very nice bedfellows, I think. And any thoughts, Ian and Phil?
Phil?
Well, yeah, I mean, it goes without saying, ½ an acre is quite a small water, and is probably less than ideal for tench. One of the things that tench do, they like to roam. They like a complex habitat. They like varieties of depth and so on to feed and to move around in. You're unlikely to produce sizable tench in a ½ acre pond. But having said that, if the balance is right and there aren't too many, then they should make 2 to 3 pounds. I mean, I don't know if that's some people say that's small. I think it's okay. You know, they're fun to catch. They're worth catching at that size. And that's what you need to do. You need a fishery survey, perhaps, to look at the populations of fish that you've got. I don't know how sort of with it your club is, but check the pH level. The sort of ideal, the kind of sweet spot for tench is about pH 8.5. But anything over a 7 is good. Anything over 8 is very good. But you know, possibly the application of calcium carbonate, Siltex might help fertility a bit. But these things are difficult to say without really looking at the water and getting someone with a bit of biological expertise to have a look. If you've got lots and lots of rudd, coarse fish, they do have their own niches, but they also compete. So that's a problem. And it's a well-known established fact that crucians and tench get on very well. They're both fairly benign, easygoing feeders. They don't tear up weed beds and so on like some species of fish might do. So I don't think there's anything wrong with the species mix. So think about fertility, think about the numbers of fish you've got. I hope that helps. There are no easy answers to questions like this.
I think actually just to, to add to that, Phil, we visited Andrew Ellis of AE Fisheries, didn't we? And he's got a real passion for tench. And one of his messages was, less is often more.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is about creating space. And he said he breeds his tench, or I know he feeds them, but he breeds them, and he starts off by thinning out to give them more space.
Yeah,
which is a really interesting message.
If you, just to say, this is a tip from our understanding at UK Coarse Fish. If you really are concerned about the fish and you want to help them along, I know it's kind of quite the thing in the carp world now to feed the fish. Then apparently 2 to 3 millimeter high protein pellets are the thing to feed them with, animal based pellets rather than vegetable based, and only feed at temperatures at over 14 degrees centigrade. Anything less than that and they won't convert it into growth. I'm not necessarily advocating you go around feeding your fisheries. I'm not sure it's something you want to do, but there's just a few thoughts about it if that's helpful.
Brilliant, thank you for that. Right, so one from Mark now, which I guess probably just relates to the water, to be honest, and that is what would be the average growth rate for a tench stocked at 4 inches long? Do you think there is any kind of ballpark figure, or would that entirely depend upon the water in question and the habitat that's available to those fish?
Well, according to Alan Henshaw at Calverton, tench grow very slowly in the initial years. So I guess a 4-inch fish would probably be about a year old. In 2 years, they might make 8 inches. In 3 years, they might make 12 inches. When they get into their stride, when they're sexually mature and they're feeding hard, then you might get half a pound a year. And some of the big gravel pits, which are very fertile, they're getting a pound a year. But that is really going some for tench to grow at that sort of speed. So expect slow growth. Don't be discouraged by it necessarily, and give it a bit of time. But hopefully, should be a pound in 5 years and 2 pounds in 8 would be pretty good. And then after that, they'll grow for 15 years. They might even put on weight beyond 15 years. So
wow.
I think also worth noting as well, we'll come on to this probably later, but consider a stock pond and feeding them where you can enhance that growth fairly straightforwardly, and you can bring those fish. Aaron Standing brings them up to 3 or 4 pounds in about 4 years, doesn't he?
Yeah, that's real professional fish breeding. They're selectively bred and so on. He knows his game backwards. Aaron does. He breeds tens of thousands of tench, but certainly I would say worth considering for any club is buying in tench when they're relatively cheap at sort of 6, 8, 10 inches, putting them in a protected stock pond and feeding them with a high protein pellet over the summer months, and within 2 or 3 years they could be making 2 pounds, 2.5 pounds in that sort of environment. Well worth considering rather than trying to buy fish at 3 pounds and so on, which are relatively scarce and are knocking out at something between 15 and 20 pounds a pound for individual fish. They are expensive, so certainly advocate thinking about bringing them on in a stock pond if you can. Another little tip there is don't mix them with other species. I've seen people say that they put carp with them to accelerate the growth, and that the fish breeders seem to think that's just absolutely wrong. But angling's like, there's all sorts of funny ideas out there.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? And I mean, that leads quite nicely onto another question we've had through from Mark Griffin. And Mark says, which fish species most adversely affects tench stocks? And I mean, would it be as simple an answer as king carp, or could it be anything really in the circumstances?
Carp carp and bream. Bream are not
Bream.
great bedfellows with tench. We've seen evidence of that in some of the sort of premier tench waters around the country. And once the bream get involved, they can coexist with carp, and quite often a lot of the very big tench come from carp waters.
Yeah.
Horseshoe Lake Carp Society, for instance, is a very good example. So it's a very good tench fishery, and it's a very good carp fishery, and they can coexist. Tends to be the bigger fish, but it can happen. But once you get a complete imbalance, or you wanted more tench fishing, then you really need to consider the balance of the two. But bream, crucian carp are very good bedfellows.
No, for sure. And I mean, that, I think what's really nice about this is I think the project as a whole goes so hand in hand with the National Crucian Conservation Project as well.
Yeah.
It really fits well, and the two species which such good bedfellows, and are in need of assistance in this sense. And I think there will definitely be a lot of room for that going forward, of how the two campaigns can bounce off each other. So I think that's really.
Can I just pick that up, Alex? Actually, you're right. When we presented this concept to the Angling Trust, and we had the Environment Agency, various others, we had the Crucian Project guys there, and used them as this is what they've done, and there's no reason why we can't follow and use. They've set a great example as well in terms of actually looking at a species for different reasons, but also a popular species, and giving it some sort of support.
There's a couple of points I'd like to add there. First of all, if we're talking about tench versus carp, it has been mentioned that very often carp fishes produce the biggest tench, and it's perfectly true. And Ian mentioned horseshoe. If you think about horseshoe, it's 80 acres. It's got a very complex, varied habitat, and the carp and the tench can find their own niches in there and can coexist. The other thing I would say is that the evidence, such as we have, suggests that tench do better with small numbers of big carp than large numbers of small carp. So, for example, 20 10-pound carp is better for the tench than 200 1-pound carp, just 200 males. So it's about meshing in and finding a niche and working together. But the story must be, if you've got a cracked tench water, be very careful what you do in terms of stocking, because you've got something there that needs to be preserved, and just take advice on stocking other species as Ian mentioned, bream as well as carp. Not against these fish, don't get me wrong. It's not a question of that. It's just a question of saying, let's make a bit of room for tench.
Definitely. And I think that's a really important point to emphasize, isn't it? We're not saying that there is always going to be a right or wrong way of going about this. And as the case study will show later on, there are examples where bream and tench can coexist quite happily, as they can with those carp in small numbers. So it's I think it's a really important point, Mark, and thank you for raising it. But I wouldn't get too bogged down on it, so to speak. With
can I just sort of interrupt you there, Alex?
Yeah, sure.
There's one left field idea that I would, if I got a water with no fish in it and I was going to stock it with tench, which would be my own choice, the other species to stock would be chub. And the reason for that is chub give you something to fish for in the winter, and they can be really good in still waters on the mag and waggers, as if you've ever had experience of that, as you know. They tend not to breed very well, which is probably a good thing in a still water. And they also act as a bit of a predator in terms of, perch are a great predator, but you run the risk with perch of a small perch overrun, because they can really go, crazy and breed like mad. So that's just a personal viewpoint. You won't find that in any THA literature, but chub, yeah, why not?
No, I think that's a really interesting one. Certainly, I mean, I think given the niche that chub occupy, being a sort of upper to mid-water species as well versus the tench, I think it sounds like there's definitely mileage in that, Phil. So it's something worth thinking about. And I think again, given, and by the way, everyone, thank you for sending in the question. We've got loads already, so there's plenty to get stuck into. This leads us really nicely on to one from Chris. And so Chris says he's got a small non-commercial lake dominated by perch and carp. It hasn't been stocked in 20 plus years and has suffered predation from otters and cormorants. We've been busy clearing the banks and deterring the predators. Would a small stock of tench be a sensible addition, or would the existing stock need to be thinned in that regard? So I think based on what we've just talked about there, it probably depends on the numbers of carp that you've got in there, Chris. Versus sort of size, obviously with it being 20 plus years since stocking this, but I'm guessing it's quite a sort of mature water. Do you have any thoughts, Ian and Phil?
Well, I think just to reiterate a couple of things we've touched on, less is more. Create the space. The words we've been given that time and again. Create space. And again, we're talking about mouths again, how many fish, right? Thin it down and then put some refuges in. Before you do anything, protect what you've got. Now, I know it's not easy. Some smaller waters, you put a refuges in, I guess people are going to start chucking lines over them, and it's not easy. I get that, but somehow you need to create the refuges to, as it has been predated, which you said it has, and the evidence of the scans they've done at Sywell. And we've put we've worked with the fishery, the manager there, and there's probably 20 to 30 of those refuges around Sywell, 70 odd acres, and every one they go to, there are fish around them.
Says it all.
So you're protecting what you've got before you put anything in. Don't put them in afterwards; it's too late.
No,
and then make a bit of space, and that's the professional advice that we've learned.
No, really important point. And I think, Chris, this is a very good opportunity for me to plug the Angling Improvement Fund now as well. So this is a AT administered fund. So we get a tranche of rod license money off the EA to divvy up amongst angling clubs, fisheries, anyone that wants to apply. And the last round launched 5 days ago, and it is specifically for measures to protect fish stocks from predation. So that could be fish refuges, otter fences. Not that fish refuges are expensive anyway; they can be very easy to make. There's lots of good guidance. I think the EA actually might have even been Andy Eves up at my neck of the woods, made a really good video about building a cheap fish refuge. But you can apply for funding for this right now, and we are running a virtual forum with the fund administrator next week, who will be giving you tips on the application process. So that's one well worth looking out for if it's something you're thinking about. So yeah, definitely before you do, if you are going to stock, make sure that those fish are going to be safe, I think is the take-home message. So thank you for that, Ian. Next one in is from Eric Owen. Evening, Eric. Hope you're well. So Eric says, hi, Eric from Little Britain Anglers in Bury. Our disused canal and our new Stillwater has big tench up to £8 and over, but also has lots of small tench in the 2 to 3 ounce bracket. These waters are very weedy and very overgrown with weed. However, we don't seem to catch many. I think this is because of all the natural food available. What are your feelings on this? It's great to see young tench coming through, but we need to work to help improve what we have and help the tench we have. I think that sounds like a really, really positive scenario. The fact that you can't catch them is always a difficulty. But if they're there, I think that's got to be a good thing. And I've seen, you might even know it, Eric, the Leeds Liverpool stroke Bridgewater Canal at Lee. I've been fishing that a lot recently, and that is stuffed with tench, and I'm sure they're in front of you all the time, and they never open their mouths. So there you go. I've seen it. I've seen a line of a dozen anglers where everybody's caught tench, big tench as well, up to £8, which I think big fish for canals. And that'll be one day, and then the next day you'd think there's no tench in the canal. So a really interesting one. And any thoughts, Phil, Ian?
Phil?
No, I mean it's difficult to talk in theory. If you've got a lot of 2 and 3 ounce tench, you've got a lot, then it probably would pay to thin them out a bit. If you've got somewhere else to put them, then and you can get the necessary permissions, and then that wouldn't be a bad idea if you've got a lot round about that size. The problem is you don't know how old they are. So if they're very young, then they've got plenty of growth left. But if they're old stunted fish, then, which is possible with fish of less than a pound, then there won't be much growth in them anyway. So thinning out is certainly a possibility. I don't think natural food stops you catching tench. Tench go through a period when through the sort of April-May period, when they're working very hard to get up to spawning condition, and they feed very hard. And then after they've spawned, they tend to spread out and feed relatively slowly and carefully, because they're not trying to build themselves up. They're just trying to maintain themselves. So they're often very finicky fish. They have different modes of feeding anyway. And they can just be blooming hard to catch, particularly after the sort of end of June. They can get, but they're still there and they're still feeding. You've got to be crafty to catch them. But I don't think natural food will stop you catching them. And natural food's great, isn't it? It's what fish live on. It's what they need. And if you've got a lot of natural food, it's fantastic. There just seemed to be a slight contradiction in the question, because there's a lot of small tench that don't seem to be growing, and there's a lot of natural food, which makes me ask the question: which is it? Is it overstocked with tench, or is there a lot of natural food to go around? And I can't answer that. That would need maybe a fisheries survey to ascertain that.
Yeah, it might be worth, Eric, getting in touch with the guys at Brampton for fish aging. So I believe they can age fish very accurately from scale samples there. And I'm sure if it's worth asking the question, can they do it? It's paid for by Rod License Money One, which again, we actually had a virtual forum with them a while back now, talking about some of the services that they offer, and fish aging is one of those. So that might help you there to discover, if indeed they are stunted, or what exactly the problem is there. So it's worth definitely worth exploring.
But I think just to add to that, Alex, absolutely, is contact your local fishery, your EA fisheries team.
Yeah.
And they can do surveys. They can do a netting survey. They can advise you. They're the professionals. It's your rod license money. Go talk to them, and use some of that knowledge and expertise. And I've just found them really, really helpful people.
No, they are definitely, and that's a message that we're always banging on about on these fisheries forums. But yeah, make sure you've got a good relationship with your local EA officers. I know you already have, Eric. Give Woody a ring, and I'm sure he'll be able to assist on that. But yeah, no, really important point, though, Ian, and thank you for making that, and thank you, Phil, for your response before. So I'm slightly conscious of time. We've still got loads of great questions which we'd like to get through, and I'm conscious, of course, we've got the case study. What I propose, if everybody's happy, is that we will continue with just straight Q&A until the end, and Sam and I will send out a recording of the case study later on, if that works with everybody. If that's extremely disappointing for you, please put something in the chat and let us know. But I'm just really keen that we get through everyone's questions and comments, because we have got some really good stuff, and I'm keen to sort of keep the dialogue going. Yeah,
okay, Alex, if possible, could we squeeze it in? Because the reason is that I just want to demonstrate that it can be done. It's not just a theory, bunch of silly old blokes from the Tenchfishers saying you should do this or do that. If we can sort of just demonstrate, look, here's a club have done something, and they've got a thriving tench fishery, and it's popular with people. If people can see that afterwards, or if we get a chance, we'll have a look. But I think it's just a really important message. Is yes, it doesn't have to be super scientifically laid out. It can be done, and it's a success story, and there's nothing quite like a success story, is there?
No, that's a very good point, Ian. I think, yeah, I think if you'd like to do that, that's what we'll do. And as I say, we can pick up where we left off on the questions soon. I reckon if we get through a couple more, then we'll run the case study, and then obviously if there are any questions about that, we can take them on. And of course, yeah, if we don't get around to more, we will definitely follow all these up anyway. So I think let's crack on for a couple more and then run that. So. Great. And I think this is a really good one from Graham. Would you have help? Would you be able to help a South Wales club? So this isn't anything exclusive to England, or
no? It's not a problem. It's in the UK. It's I don't see why not. We're happy to help. Happy to help anybody. If people have got a passion for it, and have got the enthusiasm and actually want to make something happen, then it would be certainly something we'd have a look at. We more than help. We've got Tenchfisher members all over the country as well, so it's a broad church. So the short answer is yes.
Excellent stuff. Thank you, Ian. Right, so good one from Dale, which I think is something we slightly touched on before. How does a tench population disappear in a 2-acre lake which becomes overpopulated with roach and rudd? I think this is probably quite a common occurrence, isn't it, where tench will be quite prolific, and then overnight people stop catching them. I mean, there's probably a multitude of reasons for that, but any thoughts, Phil?
I've always mentioned the fact that tench don't spawn every year, and they can go several years without spawning successfully, and the requirements for tench successful spawning are a little bit specific in terms of weed and available food, whereas roach in particular can actually spawn successfully on a flat bottom with nothing there in terms of weed or any features. So if you've got adequate weed beds, then that is something that isn't responsible but might be. I don't mean to criticise, but it could be just a failure to monitor what's going on in the water. There's no doubt at all in my mind that at times you've got to support stock tench. You can't assume that they will just go on and on for generation after generation. And if there are signs that they are starting to go back, or you're not catching as many, then that could be the time to get a small spot pond and bring some on, or get some and stock them and support them. One of the things you can do with tench as well, as an aspect there, is that you can sex them. You can tell males from females, and there's a reasonably certain theory that males don't live as long as the females. So you need to look as time goes by, are we catching enough male tench? And quite often you can get bags of tench and there's 16 females and there's like two males, and you could be running into problems there. And you need to perhaps do a bit of support stocking, and you can actually stock with males. You can age tench, sex them, sorry, at about 2 years of age. So keep an eye on it. That's all I can say. But if your roach and rudd are generally going to spawn every year, and they're going to be more successful. So again, it's a question of monitoring what's going on, really. But the tench may still be there. It just might be being difficult, and and then next year suddenly, oh, we're catching them again. That happens. Yeah. I don't know why. I haven't got a clue.
Yeah, I think it's always the way, isn't it, with angling? Yeah, it's often the question of why is the one that is asked the most. But I think, yeah, that's insightful stuff, Phil. Thank you for that. So I think what we'll do now is we'll squeeze in the case study video. So it's about 8 minutes long. So that should give us another good half hour to have a bit more discussion afterwards. But as I say, any more questions, keep them coming in. We'll do our very best to get around to everybody. So what I'll do is now, if we just put our cameras off and videos on mute, I will run this and we'll come back on.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this virtual fisheries forum evening all about the National Tench Heritage Alliance movement. My name's Sam and I work as an engagement officer for the Angling Trust. I have done for about 7 months now. I'm also involved on a committee for an angling association local to where I live in Yorkshire. This presentation I'm about to give is just a quick case study run through of what this angling association has done with one of its stillwater fisheries to develop it as a tench orientated fishery where they are the dominant species. So just to offer a quick background to the fishery, as you'll have seen on the previous slide, the official name is Queen Mary's Dub, but the lake's also known as the Figure of 8 Lake due to its shape. As you can see by that aerial photograph, it's got a widening at each end and a narrowing in the middle. It's approximately 3 acres in size and it's situated in North Yorkshire, which historically is a part of England where tench as a species haven't become anywhere near as well established as they have in the Midlands or further down south, let alone particularly grown to specimen size. The lake was given its name by Mary Queen of Scots when she visited the site in 1559, and that gives you a rough idea just how long the lake's been there. It's a mature, well-established fishery where there's a very broad range of fauna and flora and tree-lined banks for most of the way around the lake. Here's a slightly larger scale map view of the site that I've borrowed from DEFRA's Magic Map tool, just to illustrate the coverage of the Triple SI designated land that's present within the Ripon Parks. And as you can see, both Queen Mary's Dub and Blackheath Pond, the two fisheries managed by Bradford Angling Association, they're well encapsulated within these Triple SI boundaries. As I'll touch on later, this causes complications in terms of managing these fisheries. Here's just a few photos that I took of the fishery last week to offer you more of a first-person insight into what the fishery looks like and the kind of habitat that's on offer for the tench. Depths at the fishery range from around 2 foot in the shallowest end right down to 12 foot at the deepest end. Since Bradford No. 1 Angling Association took upon management of the fishery, it's undergone quite considerable evolution in that time. It's always been a mixed fishery as Queen Mary's Dub. However, from 1970 till around 2000, it was a carp orientated fishery where carp were the dominant species. At this period, tench, bream and the other species present were fairly stunted and rarely reached specimen size. Queen Mary's Dub was quite renowned as a specimen carp fishery over this era, and it produced fish to over 40 pounds, which for Yorkshire were very desirable, attracting anglers from far and wide. Sadly, this wasn't to last, as around early 2000s there was an increasing issue with otter predation, and the carp stock had to be moved into the protected neighbouring Blackheath Pond, where an otter fence was able to be erected. This left behind just the tench and bream, which the tench very quickly became the dominant species, really thriving in the absence of the carp. So with the absence of carp, it wasn't just the tench that really began to thrive with the extra space and resources. As you can see, there's good bream as well as healthy populations of rudd at the fishery. It's very noticeable that a good proportion of our members really value being able to target these kind of species using traditional methods and tactics. So to further assist the establishment of tench as the dominant species at Queen Mary's Dub, the club implemented an assistive stocking programme over a period of 4 years. From 2013 to 2017, 50 mature tench were introduced at sizes of 3 to 4 pounds. These tench were transferred from some of the club's other stillwater fisheries where carp were present, and the tench once again were noticeably stunted. These newer tench have integrated extremely well with the older fish stock, and this is illustrated by increasingly good fishery performance season upon season, as well as good growth rates amongst the fish. The stocking density of Queen Mary's Dub is around 250 pounds per acre. This is an approximation as the club hasn't performed any fish survey work on site for a number of years, but it's planned that the club isn't going to increase this stocking density much more than its current state. In terms of managing the fishery, there's a lot of external influences that really impact what the club can do on site, as well as how they regulate anglers. Various fisheries management practices are implemented on site, but only a few of them have relevance to the goal of promoting tench development and dominance. The main take-homes are that the club doesn't undertake any large-scale weed removal. This ensures that there's ample larders of natural food as well as safe cover for the fish to feel, protected and just be able to have cover from predators, etc. The club also has, it doesn't intend to increase the stocking density a great deal more than its current state, which again just goes to ensure that there'll be ample space and resources available for the fish stocks. The club hasn't felt the need to implement any kind of supplementary feeding regime. The good fishery performance and growth rates of the fish currently being observed indicate that this isn't needed. So in terms of management of the fishery going into years ahead, like many fisheries, we've noticed an increasing number of cormorants visiting the site. This is a concern for survival rates of juvenile fish and silverfish populations, so the club's looking into introduction of scare tactics that we have implemented at other fisheries, such as agricultural gas guns. Another development is that the club's looking at potentially introducing crucian carp in low numbers. This is another heritage fish species that we feel would integrate extremely well within the current fish stock dynamic and offer our members an angling opportunity that is extremely rare in the area of Yorkshire. This won't distract, however, from the fact that Queen Mary's Dub will remain a tench-orientated fishery, and the club hope that anglers continue to support, appreciate and enjoy what this fishery represents in a modern fishery scene where carp angling and carp-orientated fisheries are the main. So probably the exciting bit that you've all been waiting to hear is just a run through of the current state of tench productivity at Queen Mary's Dub. So before the club decided to take a stance of developing the fishery to be a tench orientated lake, the average size of tench was sort of around 3 to 4 pounds, with fish beginning to peak around 6 pounds. They very rarely exceeded that kind of weight bracket. Since the club's taken measures to develop the fishery as a tench orientated lake, 5 to 6 pound is now the average size. Fishery performance is very good, with multiple captures by members relatively common under good conditions and at the right times of year. But it's not just numbers, with a noticeable number of increasing specimen tench being produced by this fishery. Specimen tench of 7, 8 and even 9 pound plus have been caught in recent years, which again for the area of Yorkshire is really quite exceptional. It's not just specimen tench that are on offer, however. The fisheries managed to produce other specimens, with big bream over 10 pounds and rudd between 1 and 2 pounds being reported by members. It's an exciting time for the fishery, and we look forward to seeing its productivity in even more years to come. So that brings us to a nice end for this case study presentation. Hopefully that was enjoyable for you all. So for now, I'm going to say thank you very much for listening, and I'll be waiting at the end of this virtual forum to take any questions about this case study, to which I can do my best to give you an answer. Thank you very much, and bye for now.
Well, that was brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Sam. I think we made the right call by running that and not shunting it back tonight. I think it does give a really powerful illustration of how what can be achieved with some kind of basic fishery management practices to help tench. Thank you very much for putting that together, Sam. And I see, so we've got you on board now. So any more that relate, we will pick up on.
Hopefully my Yorkshire accent wasn't too off-putting for you all.
Sam, I think if they can survive with my horrible Manx twang, and, Cheshire, then yeah, they can probably put up with yours. So I think we've probably survived that. So what I did do is I had a bit of WhatsApp with Ian while we had that on, and we decided that we were going to push back by 15 minutes, if that's okay with you guys, just to ensure we get round as many of the comments as possible. Although I did say 8:30 originally, but we're all happy doing that. So I think what we'll do is we'll just crack straight on with the Q&A chat. So the next one that came in was from Cliff, and Cliff says, what are the best weeds for tench and their food? So I think that's a really good one.
Do you want me to say something about that? Yeah, I mean, always good. I will say, looking at that story, that's an exceptional water, 3 acres and producing tench 9+. That's
It's very rich in natural food. It's not just prolific weed growth, but it's also got very thick bloodworm beds. It's very silted up. So
yeah. Do you know what species of weed you've got?
We have quite a mixture, predominantly Canadian pondweed. That's the invasive elodea. That's the most established.
Yeah. Elodea is very good, but it is invasive. And the SSI people will tell you it's non-native as well.
Yeah.
So it's regarded as a bit of an alien. I certainly wouldn't put it into a water personally if I was starting a tench fishery and I've got a clean slate. Something like hornwort or mare's tail would probably be better. And on the subject of water lilies, you've got quite a lot of water lilies there, and I know that they're regarded as enormously attractive and associated with tench fishing. My own experience is they can be problematic in terms of taking over water or choking it, and they're not an oxygenating plant. They do provide cover and some food. And I'm a little bit, should we say, unsure about water lilies. I'd be careful with them because they can be, if they get established and they grow thickly, they can be very difficult to remove, even more so now, given that certain weed killers and that are banned, quite rightly so, as it happens. So I would be very careful with lilies. With soft weeds like milfoil, mare's tail, hornwort are probably the best. There's also Potamogeton. Now, there are so many different species of Potamogeton, it's difficult to generalize. Here's a bit of a paradox. Tench like to spawn in curled pondweed or Potamogeton crispus, as it's called, but it is a really thick and a difficult weed, and it can really get heavy growths. And if a tench burrows into it, on tackle, you won't get them out. So I'd be very careful with Potamogeton crispus, although it does happen to be a really good sporting site. But I would say that, hornwort and milfoil can provide excellent spawning sites, as indeed can willow roots as well. If you've got overhanging trees, they're good as well. But all weed is good. The trouble is just controlling it, and because we have eutrophication and runoff off the fields and everything, the weed can go mad, and then you've got a problem. And then people remove the weed, and then they get loads of blanket weed because there's lots of spare nutrient. So again, it's one of those things that you've just got to try and work with it. But clearly at your lake, you've got it more or less right there, Sam, from what I can see. Now, do you have trouble with getting fish out when the water's weedy?
It is an issue that anglers do experience. Yeah, the elodea, it's extremely prolific in its growth. Sort of a weed rake is an essential tool to fish the lake, and if you turn up without one a lot of the time, you more or less have to go home and retrieve it because you won't be able to get a rod in. Anglers do complain that they lose fish in the weed. It is a problem, but again, it's within the sort of triple SI terms and conditions that we can do to manage the fishery. There's the sort of dye options and other methods to reduce the weed cover aren't available for that fishery.
Yeah. And certainly I was in one fishery where they had regular working parties, and the work there was large scale dragging, and that was very successful. You get a team of six blokes on a big drag, and you can clear some really nice swims relatively easily.
It's a double-edged sword, because at the same time, the thickness of the weed is also what promotes the amount of natural food and the cover for the fish to really sort of feel safe and thrive. So
and to spawn successfully. So 100%.
No,
I think guys, just one point there. We're just talking about dragging weed out, especially Canadian pondweed, elodea, is when you drag that out, go through everything you pull out and look, because you will see lots of very small tench in there. Very rarely see any others. Do see some. I mean, I often see people, they drag it out and leave a pile on the bank. You're actually then undoing a lot of good work at the fishery. You do need to go through that weed and release the small tench in there. And it's a good point. Dragging's good. It's great. It helps you catch fish, but you need to be considering that as well.
No, really important point. Thank you for that, Ian. And I think, you know, that segues nicely on to a point from Andrew Spicer, which is, other than refuges, what advice can you give to encourage spawning and avoid predation? And I guess the simple answer to that would be weed, wouldn't it? Would be natural cover within your fishery. You know, it's acting as another refuge. It's home for the food that the tench are going to eat. It's a place that they can spawn. It's a place that they can get out of the way of predators. You know, and I think, yeah, the angling access is an issue, but, you know, you can drag, there's other approaches to it. You know, and I think it is going to be a key part of any tench fishery, isn't it? But I think, you know, something I think it probably is worth expanding on a little bit more. I know you've got some opinions about this, Phil. Is water lilies as one. So I think probably contrary to popular belief, they're maybe not as good as people think they are. What are the sort of reasons for that then, and why would we want to look at sort of soft weeds more so rather than lilies for instance like that? Is it mainly the shading?
Oh, it's the shading. It's the food larder, and it's of course they provide oxygen, which lilies don't. The danger with lilies is they just. I mean, I don't know whether Sam knows Carlton Towers, for example, in North Yorkshire again. Fantastic tench water. It's completely choked with lilies to the point where you're reluctant to fish it because, you know, tench charges off, and, you know, it's no good for the fish. It's no good for you. So I'd be reluctant to go very far. If you want cover, then probably amphibious bistorte is better. On the question specifically of spawning, remember, tench don't spawn in water over 3 feet, and generally that's the sort of depth that they want, which is why if you've got a deep water with no shallow areas, then recruitment will be relatively poor. But that may be a good thing because it might give you big tench and keep the numbers down, but they need shallows to spawn successfully. So 18 inches to 36 inches, that sort of depth with lots of weed is ideal spawning territory, I think. Yeah.
No, really good point, Phil. Thank you for that. Right, so Adam says, can I shamelessly plug my club's tench water? You certainly can, Adam. Astwell Mill. It's never seen a king carp. I would be very interested in any advice and upkeep and improvement from the Tenchfishers. So I think, Adam, once we've got the knowledge base up and running on the area of the AT website, that'll be a fantastic resource for you. And I'm sure the guys at the Tenchfishers will be more than happy to advise and help you every step of the way on that.
Yeah.
So I think that's.
I don't, you know, if it's going well, then monitor it, keep an eye on it, and think about if you need to do support stocking and that kind of thing. You mentioned refuges; they're important. I don't know what specifically, if you have got issues or problems you've got in mind, but, you know, we could perhaps have a chat about it another time, more specifically.
No, absolutely. Thanks, Phil. Right, so next one's from Ben. And Ben says, we have tench in 2 small lakes. The top lake flows into the lower lake, and over the years they've gone. We want to turn the top lake into a tench and crucian carp only water. Have you got any tips on how we can maintain population and any other advice that prove useful? As for the lower lake, what is a good ratio for mixing species? So I think, Ben, definitely, if you've not already done so, speak to your local EA officer, because they'll probably be able to get a better understanding of the site. They'll probably come out and give you a visit and, you know, maybe conduct a survey if necessary. And will probably be able to give more specific advice than we're able to provide on here tonight. But any general thoughts at all?
Well,
that, guys?
I would certainly reiterate that, you know, they are the professionals. We're not. We are very, very enthusiastic amateurs and who talk to other clever people and share their knowledge. But they, yeah, just go talk to them, and they can give you ideas on. They'll know about the habitat. They can advise you on stocking levels or appropriate, you know, stocking levels for your water, whether it's suitable for the sort of species you're talking about, and it's very difficult without knowing, but you know, with the habitat. But I would certainly pay a visit to them, and at least initially see what they've got to say, because they're there for you, and you know, rod license money and all that.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more, Ian. So I hope that helps, Ben. Okay, so one from Mark, and this is something that's brought up quite a lot, is Siltex. Mark says, "What's the advantages of adding Siltex?" So I think for those that don't know, it's probably worth explaining. So Siltex is something that breaks down biological matter. It's a treatment that you can place upon your waters if there's any sort of old, you know, thick, black, sludgy silt. You can put Siltex in, and it will help to break that down. You know, it's not going to work miracles for you, but it can be advantageous in a lot of places. Is there any distinction, any relation with Siltex and developing tench fisheries specifically? Do you think? Phil, Ian, Sam, do you think it's just something that's more general to fishery management practice? Does it make waters more alkali? Is there anything?
Yeah. It's porous calcium carbonate, you know, which is basically chalk. And if you sprinkle it around, then it will improve the pH level. I don't know an awful lot about it, so whether it actually breaks down silt, it's reputed to do so. I've heard it said. I don't have any direct experience of it. I don't know if anybody else has. There is also some stuff called, I think it's hydrogenated lime, which you must never put in a water because it will kill the fish. Although it does wonders for the pH level, it's too caustic. But Siltex is quite safe to apply apparently, and it will definitely improve the pH. So if it's down below 7, and Siltex could well be a good solution. But again, talk to a professional about this. Did you use any Siltex on your water, Sam?
We haven't, no. Siltex isn't a method that's applied to the dub.
No. Caution, I think, would be the word there.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's something that I'll probably be able to dig it out for you, Mark, but we did have a session with some guys from the EA not so long ago, and there was quite a significant part of that was talking about Siltex, and there was quite a bit about how you should be cautious with it, you know, only treating certain areas at certain times. But I'll see if I can dig that out for you. But you know, otherwise, as Phil says, you know, speak to a professional, speak to your local EA officer, or a fishery management consultant, someone, and they will be able to give you, you know, really specific advice for your waters. But no, thank you for that. Anyway, Phil and Sam. So one, and this is one I'd be interested to know, and it was a parasite that was actually mentioned at a forum we had last night as well, Ergocillus. And so Matthew Faulkner says, quite a complex question. What are the impacts of Ergocillus parasites? I've approached numerous fish farms for larger tench, and all are saying this is a huge problem now. Smaller fish are often available up to 10 inches, but rarely available above, largely because they are only available from cropped waters, and this is where class 2 parasites are a problem, and no one appears to farm them beyond 10 inches. I have a small fishery with tench, crucians, rudd, and silver bream. Is Ergocillus something you're familiar with at all, guys, in relation to tench?
Is that gill maggot? Is it?
I think it might be. I think it might be. I say it was mentioned yesterday. I think it's probably Matthew, probably a question again for probably the guys at Brampton. So the parasites and diseases specialists. I mean, I can certainly drop them an email on your behalf if you'd be interested to know, because they're, you know, obviously quite heavily involved in monitoring these things. I think it might be, to be honest, Phil. You know, obviously don't take my word for it, but
the issue about there not being a lot of bigger tench is that could be a problem in certain areas of the country if there's a parasite that's developing. but the simple expense of keeping and raising tench beyond 10 inches means that a lot of fish farmers would rather move them on at that smaller size, which is where really having your own stock pond and maybe bringing them on yourself is worthy of consideration. But I don't know too much specifically about that parasite.
Sorry, Phil, just to come in there, on the Sywell reservoir, we've stocked now 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 stockings of fish from sort of small 1 to 2 year old up to fish of 8 pounds, and they've all come from what we would call approved fish breeders. So this is people we've been to, they've got a passion for tench, they let you look around their facility, they understand tench, and they breed them on, and there's never been any issue with the parasitic component coming from them, because they've been bred from larvae. Effectively, they breed their own. Yeah. Now, which brings me into one of my sort of pet subjects, which is when you are looking, or if you're looking to stock tench, you need to make a decision very early on about, do you stock fish that have been bred, and then their sort of provenance, if you like, or do you buy what you could term as second-hand tench that have come from another water, they've been netted, and you don't really know how old they are. They will have been checked through the sort of the CFAS checks and stuff, but they're more of an unknown entity, and that's the sort of decisions that that people have to make. We chose at Sywell just to stock with fish that have been bred, and I say we've never come across any issues with the parasite. Now, it may be that's part of it, I don't know.
Oh, for sure. Thanks, Ian. So yeah, I think Matthew, if you do want any more detail, let me know, and I'll see if I can get that followed up with the fish lab guys. But as Ian's just said, if you can get fish that have been bred from fry, then is going to be advantageous in that sense. So thank you for that.
Sorry, just one more quick point there. Sorry, Alex, while it's in my mind. If you talk to or engage with the people who do the fish breeders, every so often they turn over their brood stock. So they are fish that they have taken from their own, their own small fish, and their brood stock. And we've bought 2 lots of brood stock now, and as I say, their provenance, where they come from. They're good, strong, healthy young fish, right? And if you can sort of tap into that, then there's a really good chance that you can get some decent, young, fast growing, healthy fish. Worth considering. But it's about these relationships again.
100%. No, really good point, Ian. Thanks for that. Right, so Mark asks, we put 200 8 to 10 inch tench now Match Lake in November. How will they grow? I think that's probably one we've already touched on a fair bit. It's dependent on a number of factors really, but don't expect them to grow particularly fast, especially if you've got to compete with other fish. But be optimistic, keep an eye on it, and really see where that can develop. Any thoughts at all, Ian, Phil?
Depends entirely on the fertility of the water and the number of other species and competing fish there are in there. It'd be very difficult to say without knowing that information.
I think that's it. Yeah, and again, we've said it quite a few times, but speak to local EA officers, and the likelihood is they'll have that knowledge of the water already, and will be able to give you that tailored advice. So well worth considering. And I should add as well, if anyone on this call doesn't already have that relationship with the local officers, or they don't know who they are, by all means drop me an email and I'll put you in touch. They are the great guys. They're always more than happy to help on these things. And Mark's actually followed up with that, is recommendation for feed for tench to help them grow. What was that you mentioned earlier, Phil? It was an animal-based pellet.
Yeah, a good quality, high protein based pellet, 2 to 3 millimeters in size. Only feed over 14 degrees centigrade. And well, that's really it. How much you put in will depend on how many tench you've got, obviously, because really can't, what else there is in there. But that would be it. Definitely Coppens pellets, I think, or Aqua Premium, I think would be ones that might.
I think they were the ones that were recommended. Well, that's what our understanding uses, and he's produced these the tench that we bought from him. Also, just probably worth noting, water temperature 14 degrees, not air temperature, just in case people get confused.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Brilliant. Thanks for that. Right, so Mick says, brilliant as always, guys. Thank you, Mick. We have tench that are all around £5 plus, and have always put it down to the fact that we've had pike in the lake that won't take that size. Is this correct? We've stocked tench around 4 years ago that were 6 to 8 inches, but no sign of catches in that time frame. Do we look to stock bigger in the future, as we're quite a well-known tench water locally? And there was another point relating to that, I think. No, sorry, my mistake. So I think basically what Mick's asking there is, do we sort of save up and put bigger fish in, worrying about predation by pike? It's always a fascinating one for me, really, because I don't really associate sort of tench as being the kind of fish that get eaten by pike, but I'm sure they do. I mean, I know catfish certainly love tench on the continent. I know they're a popular live bait, I believe, for catfish. But what do you think is the sort of relationship there with pike and tench?
Well, I'd agree with that. If you want tench, don't have catfish. Whatever you do, that's absolutely the worst thing you could do. Although there are 1 or 2 waters that have got a good head of tench, they've also got catfish in, but there are always exceptions. But we're talking about generalizations. Yeah, pike will predate on tench quite happily, if you've got a good head of pike, then I would say, instead of stocking with, say, 200 8 to 10 inch fish, if you can, I'd stock with 50 2 to 3 pounders. They're going to be safer, and that would make sense in that situation.
Definitely, and I think that applies to a lot of fish, doesn't it? Not just tench, but you've got to be sensible about that. And yeah, I have found the question. It was from Dale, and Dale said, do pike have the same detrimental effects on tench populations as they do crucian stocks? And I think that is a particularly interesting one, because certainly crucians are how can we put it politely, terrible at surviving any sort of predation. It seems to me, if there's pike in the water, they get nailed. If there's cormorants anywhere near them, they will adapt. I know the crucians do adapt genetically to sort of deal with predation in terms of the shape of the bodies and whatnot. But I mean, on the whole, would you say that tench are probably more hardy than crucians in terms of staying out of the way of pike?
Yeah, I think they're probably quite adept at because they can burrow into weeds and so on. And there've been a significant number of really good tench waters. There are also good pike waters. So particularly, again, bigger lakes, where the tench can find the places that they can go. But yeah, poor old crucians. I have heard the story, and I would defend to suggest that tench are probably a bit better at managing with pike. I'll put it that way. I've never spoken to a tench about it, but
yeah, I'm sure he'd probably agree with you, to be honest, Bill. If you ask him, I mean, I've seen it with my owners. I mean, I'm lucky to live within walking distance of what what's probably the best tench water in the northwest of England, and that's full of pike, always has been, and it's always been full of big tench as well. Well, tench of all sizes, I should say. So, you know, self-evident to a large extent.
In terms of like creating a specimen water, I think presence of pike's probably a beneficial thing, because it sort of, if you're trying to create a fishery where there's populations of year classes in a, you know, more constant curve, so a you know, younger, middle and bigger fish, having less predators is probably conducive to that. But if you've got good numbers of pike, that sort of helps promote specimen fish by taking out more of the mouths below them.
No, absolutely.
It goes back to having more resources and space for a few bigger fish, but depends what you're trying to create, I guess.
Yeah, and probably just going back to the original question, you've got an established water with specimen tench and pike in there, and you've got a number of smaller tench. It's worth noting that small tench often go missing, right? What we would consider missing for quite a long time, and come back as £1.5, £2 fish. It's not unheard of. A lot of waters where you think, you know, they've only got certain fish of this size, they do produce these, and these fish don't always get caught. And it's and tench are pretty good at that. So don't assume that they aren't there, would be my message.
No, absolutely. You know, that relates to a comment we've just had from Richard as well. Richard says, around 11 years, I stocked my lake with 350 6 to 10 inch tench, which seems to have almost completely disappeared. Since then, I've always stocked with mature netted fish more successfully. So, you know, Richard, it might well be the case that these fish will suddenly emerge out of the ether, and you'll be catching loads of tench, which should be fantastic. You know, but if what you've been doing latterly has been working for you, then you know, definitely stick at it. But yeah, thanks for those questions so far. So we've got a few more in. A couple more from Richard, and again, you know, relating exactly to what we've just been talking about. So Richard says the issue of tench coexisting with other species is also highly dependent on stock density. In my own lake, a 22-acre gravel pit, which is still maturing, my tench are putting on £0.5 per year. It's got carp around £5, and bream have reached weights in excess of £14, having been stocked at max of £7, not overstocking, which again, sounds like you're doing exactly the right thing there, Richard. And successfully breeding as well, which is great to hear. And certainly as well, Richard, yeah, vouching for the efficacy of fish refuges, all homemade, from stock fencing and cable ties, which is great to see, you know, and again, testament to the fact that if you do want to pull these things off and you've got the manpower, then it is, you know, quite straightforward to do. You know, and there is more support out there as well. You know, say we've got the Bangling Improvement Fund running at the minute, loads of resources on the web. I almost think, to be honest, I quite like to run an event like this, taking someone through step by step how to build a fish refuge. That might be quite fun in future, I think. So it's yeah, something we will have to think about.
Yeah, Alex, when we were building them at Sywell, we built some from, I think, what you just referred to as stock fencing and cable ties and you know, just wire, just to we've also bought some gabions from the sort of building trade, you know, which come up as the you know, the square or oblong that can be just assembled as well, which is just another alternative. And as you saw in that picture, you know, they get loaded up and put in, and it's just, if it can be done, it's a really good thing to get the refuges in there.
But if you've got 22 acres to play with, you've got a really good start there. I mean, you've got an opportunity there for different species to find their niches and to coexist. But again, the important thing is the balance of the species and not overstocking and so on. Yeah.
Absolutely, thanks for that. Right, so I think before so yeah, sorry, I should say for want of timing, I think there has been an excellent question come through from Mr. Nick Simmons. Good evening, Nick. I hope you're well. Tonight, which I think is probably going to be the most expansive of the evening so far, and I'd be really keen to hear both your thoughts on it, Phil and Ian. So Nick says, I see more and more waters around the country being taken over by carp syndicates. It looks as if access to general stillwater coarse fishing, which means tench fishing too, is being continually squeezed. In terms of alliances, how do the Tenchfishers feel about trying to work with organisations like Danny Fairbrass's Embryo or the owners of the Thames Valley pit complexes to work to combine quality tench fishing in their portfolio of carp-focused waters? You know, I think that's a really great question, Nick, and one which I'm sure we could talk about all night. But you know, certainly, I guess it's probably a balancing act between you know, carp waters, carp anglers not wanting to get plagued by tench, but you know, the two do sort of go hand in hand for a bit. What are your thoughts on that?
Can I just field that to start with? It's something that we talked long and hard about, and it sort of goes now that a lot of the really good tench waters, you do have to engage into some of these syndicates, and also some of the day ticket facilities. Linear fisheries over at Oxford, for instance, right? They have got some fantastic tench fish in there, and you have to fish side by side with the carp fraternity, and they produce really good ones of each. I know, and we have a very good relationship with the people at Linear, and I do know that they're just opening 2 or 3 new waters, and they will not be, I understand, totally carp dominated. They've realised there is a commercial opportunity for other species, tench being one of them. They make quite a lot of money from tench anglers. They've recognised that. Embryo and Danny Fairbrass, about 3 or 4 years ago, Embryo were going to open they'd taken over a lake at Norton Disney, I believe, Lincolnshire way, and they were going to turn that into a tench fishery. And I did engage with Danny and had a couple of conversations with him. That eventually did not come to fruition because there were concerns about he was going to launch tench from all these other fisheries and take them up there and dump them effectively, but try and run it as a commercial tench enterprise. That didn't happen. We have spoken, as I said, with some of these big sort of organisations. The problem with tench is they are not an all year round quarry. They tend to be April to sort of September time in terms of people fishing for them. And if you're running a commercial enterprise, you can stock carp and people will fish for 12 months of the year. So when you look at income and they're running it as a business, you can see why they do it. There are opportunities, but I think it's more a case of finding a water and having access to it as an existing. I don't think many of these big people who want to make money will go for a straight tench fishery just because of the very small window of when people will go. And it's a perennial problem the tench fishers have when the members cry out that we should have our own tench water, which we don't have, simply because it would only get fished for a few months of the year for tench and then have to be managed elsewhere. Another story which I'm really not going to go into tonight, but that's the reality. But Phil, have you got some further thoughts?
We'll work with anybody who's got a genuine interest in tench, and it is interesting that Linear, although it's absolutely a well known as a tremendously popular and successful carp fisher, they've always been very interested in the tench side of things as well, and been prepared to promote it and work with us to some extent. So we'll work with anybody who sincerely wants to do it. What you can't do, I don't think, is just create a specimen tench fishery. I don't think it'll happen. You've got to be a bit more thoughtful and a bit more kind of strategic about it than that. But you can do it with carp, obviously. You can put some 20-pounders in a lake and there you go, you're good to go. It's done, job done. Tench don't work in that way. So we will work with anybody who's got a genuine interest in developing tench fishing. But they've got to understand that Rome isn't built in a day. And that's where you get up against financial problems, because they want the revenue straight away rather than developing something slowly. But hopefully, I think the tide has turned. There's been quite a lot of smaller fisheries developed in the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years because of the crucian thing largely, but other reasons as well. I just hope it can expand to bigger mixed fisheries as well, which of course were commonplace in the mid 20th century. So yeah.
Absolutely. No. Thanks for that, Bill. I think that was really positive too, and I think yeah, it's the things are certainly going in the right direction from what I can see. People are certainly waking up to the value of proper mixed fisheries and tench in particular as well. So it'll be certainly an interesting next few years as to see how things develop and pan out. So thanks for that.
I think that I hesitate to say this, but I think if you are keen on tench, you've got to make a bit of a nuisance of yourself. You've got to go to the AGM with your club or whatever and start, saying, well, how about some carp? How about some tench fishing? Slip of the tongue there. How about some tench fishing? What we're going to do? Can we think about having specific waters where they've got a tench focus? And if you don't jump up and down, if you don't ask, it's not going to happen, because and due respect to them, these carp boys, they are keen. And they'll put the work in, and yeah.
I think that is such a good point, Phil. I mean, I think that applies to everything really, but particularly in this case, I'm sure everyone on this call tonight are members of a club committee. All clubs have an AGM. I think everybody should go to the AGMs of the clubs that they're in. Go and raise the things that you want to raise. Come to Angling Trust Fisheries forums or our AGM as well. Come and tell us what you think. And if you want something, you have got to jump up and down and make a little bit of noise about it. And as Phil quite rightly says, I think the popularity of carp angling these days is probably quite strongly related to how vociferous some of the voices within individual angling clubs are as well. So you've got to go and stand up for tench. I think could be a good maybe a good little campaign slogan going forward.
I think something else worth noting, Alex, is we talk often with with Alan Henshaw at the EA Calverton Fish Farm, and he said, we asked him, why don't you breed more tench to put out for clubs? And he said it's all about people asking. If clubs and societies don't ask, we don't breed them. Right? Yeah. So you've got to engage with your fishery, your EA fishery officer, and you've got to tell them to go and ask you and make a demand for tench, and eventually then Calverton will, as he said, he's there just to react to what's being asked for. The more people ask for it, the more they will breed, the more they can supply the clubs with.
100%.
They're not sitting there with this. He said every year, every all the tench they've got, they only take them up to about 1 year old, right? Because just of the space issue. But he said if the demand is there, they will do more. But you've got to create the demand in the first place for them to do it, and that comes through the fishery officers around the country. So just go out there, pester them.
100%.
The more you ask, the more they'll breed, the more you will get.
No, couldn't agree more. And I think that's like most things, if you don't ask, you don't get. And that is the process, which I think not a lot of people are aware of. Actually, it is down to the area fisheries teams to put the requests into Calverton. It's not the other way around.
So absolutely. It is. And they only do that because you the clubs, the people out there are asking them for it. You are creating the demand for them to respond to.
100%. No, brilliant. Thanks, guys. So we've got a few more. I am slightly conscious of time. I think we can probably whiz through these so we manage to get around to everyone before we close the meeting. But so one from Graham, which I think can probably be answered pretty concisely. Do you think winter tench fishing is viable? Some waters seem to produce better than others. I'm sure you've both caught tench in winter. I know I have. I'm sure you have, Sam.
Yeah.
But yeah, probably that May, June time is probably the best time, isn't it? Would you agree?
Late spring.
Yeah. It's all about metabolism, and they are a warm water species. They originate in the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea areas in Central Europe, and they their comfort zone is in the upper teens of temperature. It is interesting though how some waters do have a degree of winter form, but I would say they are very much a minority. And in fact, I was talking to a friend of mine who started tench fishing today, and he said, it's a good job I got a good book with me, he said, because there's nothing happening. And that's the coldest day in March. So I think you've got, unless you've got a water that's got good winter form, I would say, you know, go chub fishing or roach fishing, or
Yeah,
my opinion.
100%.
Not consistent.
No, that's it, isn't it? And I think it's worth making the distinction as well, probably between your kind of traditional sort of tench still waters, and then maybe canals and slow rivers. I mean, I've caught quite a lot of tench in very cold weather in canals and slow rivers, sort of drain environments. And I guess it's maybe water movement, maybe slightly higher temperature, but generally speaking, I think we can pretty conclusively say it's not.
Well, a lot of it is actually just if bait's going in. If there's bait going in, you can catch, and I've seen some of the big waters. Bait has gone in through the winter, and they still does produce the odd tench, but slow.
Yeah.
Probably largely reliant on the sort of weather patterns over the winter as well. If you have a particularly mild winter, then it's probably got more chance of having some winter form.
Yeah, you can theorize. I mean, I think the further south the water is, and the shallower it is, and the more exposed to the wind it is, I think there's more chance of winter sport. So if you've got a 30-foot deep pit in Lancashire, you're probably wasting your time. If you've got a shallow canal in Devon, you've probably got a bit. But that's just generalising.
Shallower waters are more responsive from what I've seen. Certainly, the dub, for example, I mean, it tends to fish rather slowly over the course of the winter. But if you have a few days where temperatures may rise up to double figures, if someone has a session over that time, then quite often they'll get a winter bite or two before it shuts down again as temperatures drop. So it's shallow waters do respond to sort of shorter term changes in temperature.
I can remember going down to Walcott in Shropshire years and years ago, and it was a really big tench water, and it's only about this deep, about 18, 2 feet, maybe 2'6". And you go there in March, sometimes the temperature going absolutely bonkers. You're catching them out hand over fist, and then a day later, nothing, because the temperatures slumped and they've just switched off again. So it's an interesting question, but it's not one that I admit even all my efforts really reached any definite conclusion about.
No, absolutely. No, thanks for that, Phil. Right, so we've got a few more to go. So Paul says, my club has tried to buy tenchers, found it very hard to find them, especially larger ones. Are there any efforts from the National Tench Heritage Alliance or from fish farms themselves to ensure availability of tench for fisheries to buy? It seems that that demand is not being met. I think that sort of seems to be the case, doesn't it? That it's just people can't keep up with demand, which I guess is but sort of double-edged sword, isn't it? It's a good thing in the one sense because it shows that people do want tench, but obviously the fish farms can't keep up. So is that something that the Tench Heritage Alliance is going to look at then, sort of availability of tench going forward?
It's something that we could encourage, and it's back to demand again. It's supply and demand. We're talking about with Calverton, for instance. You need to be asking for them, and I think you need to, then the fish farmers need to understand that there's a market there for it, but they are so slow growing, then they need to make a buck along the way as well. You know, and certainly a couple that we've spoken to, they will grow them on to bigger sizes. And I'm sure if you go and ask in advance, then maybe they will do them for you. Yeah, you need to come to a commercial arrangement and say, okay, if you can bring these fish on, we will buy so many fish at this, maybe £2 plus or £3. Then you need, then there needs to be a, maybe approach a reputable fish farmer and come to that arrangement. Or, as we've touched on, by the smaller ones, if you've got access to a pond and a stock pond, and we're producing some documentation on this, you can bring those fish on at a lot cheaper rate, and they're your own fish, by feeding them, as we've talked about before, and protecting them from predators, which is a far more cost-effective way of doing it if you have access to a relatively modest size stock pond. Two ways of doing it.
Talk to your EA, your local EA fisheries officer, and say, can we get some fish from Calverton? You're entitled to them if you're a public fishery, but it's a question of getting in quick and not expecting to get them. If you you want to order them on Monday and get them on Friday, then that's not going to work. You need to think ahead and work with people like Calverton. I say UK coarse fish in Sussex, they produce a lot of tench, so talk to Aaron Standing.
It's coarse fish UK is there if you look them up. Yeah, of course, and it says Aaron Standing, and he's the most knowledgeable person. We've spent days with him, and he can advise you all about tench.
A&E Fisheries in
Leamington.
That's not Leamington Spa. This Leamington in it's near Morton in Marsh, I think.
Yes, and Andrew Ellis.
He's got a big tench raising. So just look around and talk to people and say, "Oh, I'd like some next year or the year after." Think ahead. I think that's the way to do it. But as Ian says, the more demand, the more they'll probably produce. It's definitely an upswing at the moment. Let's keep it going.
No, couldn't agree more. Right, so what's one from Daniel? And I think this is probably one best followed up with, again, with your local EA officers. But is there any specific guidance needed to help choose the correct site for fish refuges, water depth, etc., or is it a case of drop them in and they will come? I guess probably putting them in anywhere wouldn't do any harm, but you're probably better off making sure they do go in the right sort of places. But again, I think if you just get in touch with your local EA guys, I'm sure they'll be able to advise. They'll probably come out and do a site visit and let you know. Or I mean, even Angling Trust fishery management advisors, they can probably help with that as well. So depending on whereabouts you're based, Daniel, Richard Banforth for the north or Jake Devoyle for the south, they will come out and give you that sort of bespoke advice for your water. So well worth reaching out to.
That's a very, very good question, and it's not one that I'm really capable of answering. But yeah, do some research into that. Be worth. We might look into it ourselves actually.
Yeah, and it depends on your water, of course, and some of the, for instance, the Sywell Reservoir, 70 odd acres. Consideration they were put where they would be out of casting range, so that was so are you going to allocate a part of your water where you can't fish, and and there needs to be, but yeah, I go to the professionals. They can look at your specific water and advise you.
No, absolutely brilliant stuff. Right, so next one is from Daryl. I reckon we'll see if we can get through these quickly because I'm keen to get us finished off before 9. So we've got one from Daryl. Daryl says we have a small lake that is an old clay pit. It has produced tench of £6, however, in small numbers. Depths run from 6 foot to 30 foot, therefore limited weed. What could we do to improve this pond? We have had issues with deoxygenation, but the tench seems to survive. Just seen population just seen depths for breeding. Our other ponds have healthy breeding tench populations. So I guess, yeah, sort of making that habitat available for breeding. I mean, if there's no shallow water, then that's probably, yeah, the reason why they're maybe not breeding so successfully. Is that something you'd agree with?
Yeah.
Phil, yeah.
Definitely, yeah. And I guess probably the food chain at 30 feet is not going to be that great for the sort of things that tench want. But sounds of salt water that, you know, you could have modest numbers of quite sizable tench in, thinking of 1 or 2 pits that have, clay pits in particular, that have produced, you know, not necessarily a lot of tench, but big ones. Thinking about, you know, brick pits in Peterborough and Olsey Lake, which was an old clay pit, and so on. So yeah, check the pH level. Obviously, you might be able to do something there, liming it, or using Siltex, I should say. Might help to raise the fertility of it. If you can plant weed, and there are weeds that will grow certainly in 10, 12 feet. I've seen them in sidewall and they're coming right to the top in 10, 12 feet of water. So do a bit of research into what weeds might work for you. Yeah, interesting question. No easy answers.
No, thank you, Phil. And a follow-up from Daryl is, and this is a good one. I'm not sure whether they've already mentioned this tonight, but will the Tenchfishers be creating a database of approved suppliers for tench? Is that something in the plans, or is that maybe kind of a bridge too far? Is it sort of up to individuals to, you know, make their own judgment on it?
Okay, we approving it's a dangerous road to go down. All we have done, we've mentioned 2 people, 2 fish breeders here, you know, AE Fisheries and Course Fish UK, only because we've engaged with them and bought fish from them, and they were willing to let us go down and visit them and see where they keep their tench and how they, you know, and understand that they have a passion for it. Because a couple of places we did speak to early on wouldn't let us come and see their setup.
Right. Okay.
So, okay, not interested. So all we can do is recommend by people we've used, and we'd be happy to do that. So creating a database, difficult, but of course, if other clubs and societies, as this evolves, come to us and say, we've had a really good experience with these particular people, then I think that's worthy of recognition.
I'm tempted to throw that one back at the Angling Trust, and you know, because it would be interesting to collect, you know, intelligence from clubs about, you know, not just tench but other species as well. You know, which breeders have proved to be. There's a job to be done there, but it would take, you know, resources and time to do it. It's an interesting idea.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it is, and I mean, so it is something that I think there was IFM involvement in past with, which you may be familiar with already. I'm not sure whether there are plans to kind of resurrect that. But as you say, it's probably just the logistics of doing it that's going to be difficult, and the sort of capacity. But you know, it's an interesting one, you know. But I think you know, at the moment, really, it's just probably the onus is on the individuals to reach out and yeah, you know, draw your own conclusions to a large extent. You know, speak to other people. You know, find out what their experiences were, and as you say, you know, speak to the suppliers themselves. You know, if you get on with them, see if you can start forging that relationship. And you know, the proof of the pudding is usually in the eating. And if you know, if they're good fish and they're working for you, then yeah, you know, stick at it. Certainly. So thanks for that, guys. Thanks for your comments there. Right, we'll whiz through these last ones and then come to a close. So, and this is actually a really interesting one. So Gary says, would you want to retain some silt on the bottom of the lake for tench to bury themselves in during the winter? Is this something that tench actually do? I've sort of heard about this in past, but I've never been sure whether it's just sort of, you know, folklore or what's the sort of score there. I mean, but on that, there's been a few comments about Siltex as well coming, which I appreciate from everyone, because it is quite an interesting relationship, this sort of tench and silt. Any views on that?
I think the sort of idea of tench hibernating in the silt comes from a lot. The earliest tench that tend to come out from the waters quite often have leeches on their bellies, as if to suggest they've been lying in the sort of lake bed matter.
Yeah, but as do pike. You catch pike after a cold spell.
Most fish species,
yes,
sort of down in the water column through winter.
Yeah.
But I guess that's where it comes from, the sort of idea that they bury in the silt.
So
Phil, I don't think there's evidence of that. Are we going to go back to the doctor fish if we're not careful, aren't we?
Well, there are all sorts of antibodies in fish slime, which it is interesting stuff. Silt's not a bad thing. It becomes a problem when it's like feet deep and everywhere. Silt's a lard, and it's rooting stock for weeds as well. So retained silt, yeah, I don't see anything wrong with it. But you can have too much, which is the problem, especially older state lakes.
Yeah, that's it. It's a balancing act, isn't it? I think at the end of the day, you know, it's about make sure there's that, you know, nice variation in habitat, you know, plenty of different niches for different things to occupy, and I'm sure, you know, it'll be be conducive to the best possible environment for tench. So that brings us nicely on to last point, which is from Richard, and I think it's actually a really good one, which we should probably mention plenty going forward, is with regards to the supply of bigger tench, making contact with carp syndicates who would tend to net out anything not carp shaped. So I think that's potentially an interesting route for, you know, where there are examples of these syndicates where, for, you know, whatever reason, the fishery managers want that kind of carp monoculture, or rather not any nuisance fish in there, and if, you know, tench can be translocated somewhere where they can go on and thrive, I think that's probably a really good thing. Would you agree, or is it not quite that simple?
If it is going to happen, then it needs to be, you know, you need to go through the correct processes and procedures with the sort of CFAS checks and everything else. And we've had that debate. I do know that some carp fisheries do that.
Yeah, well, that was the model that Sam used.
Exactly.
They brought carp from tench from other waters, and it worked.
Well, that example is that obviously a lot of angling associations and clubs with sort of a large portfolio of stillwater fisheries. They're all under sort of one stocking permit. So they have a license to transfer fish between their own waters, because in terms of like CFAS checks and biosecurity, all those waters are regulated under the same permit number, so they're sort of classed as interchangeable.
So that'd be the way with one association. But and I think, Ian, that's the first thing I should have said, so thank you for raising it. And make sure you've got your permits in order, and make sure fish
do not take cheap fish that are not certified, because you're asking for trouble. It sounds great, you just move fish, and but you really are you're taking a shortcut to you know.
I think the scientists would argue, if you took a 9-pound tench from a 50-acre gravel pit and put it in a pond of half an acre, it'd almost certainly go back and possibly die, because it just isn't able to think about that and work with that environment. So again, a bit of caution there, but it worked for Sam, you know. So I'm not saying it doesn't, but you got to be careful. And I do know people who are against moving fish at all, because they say, well, that fish lives in that environment, it's attuned to that environment, it likes that environment, and it's doing okay. You stick it somewhere else, it's not going to. Unless
it probably makes a big difference the size that you introduce them as well. I mean, we you know, £3 to £4 the individual fish.
Yeah.
So it's quite different from say a big specimen tench, £8 to £9 that's lived its entire life in a completely different environment. I think a younger fish has more ability to be malleable and sort of
brilliant, absolutely. No, that's spot on. I completely agree with that. And the age of the fish actually is probably more important than size. You know, a fish that's 3 or 4 years old is going to do a lot better than one that's 12 or 14 years old, as a general rule.
No, brilliant stuff. Thank you for that. Right, so I think that's probably as good a time as any to bring things to an end. So any final closing thoughts before we finish off? Ian, Phil, Sam.
Well, okay, just from my point of view, as I said, we are actively working on populating a part of the Angling Trust sort of website that we've got to do with the NTHA and providing advice, as I said earlier in the slides at the start of this. When that's available, I'm sure Alex can share that out. We're working on some video content to go in there in about sort of May time this year, which would be then more about the species and tactics and techniques as well to support that. So we are actively working on that, and there will be a knowledge base available to people and some contact details as well.
Absolutely brilliant stuff. Right. Well, I should say thank you ever so much to everybody that's come along tonight. Obviously, you know, it's really fantastic to see such support, such interest, I should say, behind the campaign like this. You know, something that we think is really important, and that's the reason why we're doing it. That's the reason why ATA are working with the Tenchfishers and vice versa, because we think it is so important. You know, and I hope, we can use a bit of momentum off the back of this meeting to drive things forward even further. And so obviously, thanks to everyone that's come along tonight. Massive thank you to Ian and Phil for all your hard work. I mean, I know, you know, this is a real labour of love for you guys, so it's, you know, really appreciated, you know, all the work that you've done on this, and being here tonight, of course, as well, to have a chat with our wonderful audience that we've had. And I should also say, Sam, absolute superstar, who's been working away very hard, doing notes in the background, as well as contributing to discussion tonight. And obviously getting that fantastic case study together, which I hope's given everyone a bit of a flavour of how it's been done in one location. You know, hopefully that can be inspiration to go on and try and do the same elsewhere. So I think I should say to everyone, there's again a very short survey at the end when we finish. If you can just spare a couple of minutes to fill it in, that'd be really appreciated, really useful for us. With the next virtual fisheries forum is next Tuesday about the Angling Improvement Fund. So anybody that's interested in getting some funding secured for an otter-proof fence or fish refuges, floating islands, etc., by all means jump on that call. We're there with the fund administrator, so he can answer any questions you might have about the application process, so on and so forth. So it should be a useful one. Hope to see everyone soon. Hope to see everyone in the flesh as well soon. I look forward to meeting up with Ian and Phil at some point down the line. Hopefully to get some of these videos sorted. Sam, I will see you very soon as well. And thanks ever so much again. And hopefully speak to you soon.
The next one.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.